Hey everyone, Nubkeks here. Welcome back to a discussion video where I'm going to talk about one of the big controversial issues that has been flying around the last couple of weeks, which is to do with heroes, but also of course ties across to other games and even just to life in general, I suppose. We're going to get pretty deep, probably very rambly in this video, so do bear with me. I'm going to talk about toxicity in this one, and in particular streamer and pro toxicity. For example, one of the big Reddit threads that was about this was talking about streamers or pro players referring to anyone in Diamond or below, kind of that skill range in Hero League as being a cesspool. So I'm going to talk about all that sort of stuff. I've got some gameplay in the background, which is just to illustrate some toxicity in the game, which is me and our Vala player. So we're being kind of toxic towards each other, I guess. And again, there's no like moral thing, there's no lesson in this. This is purely, the gameplay in the background is purely something we need to watch, and it's an example of toxicity. Again, there's no moral thing. We can discuss it more in the comments if you want, but there's no lesson, right? It's just, these are different examples of being toxic. That's it, okay? Here we go. Also, this is about like the 6th or 7th time I've tried to do this video. It is so bad trying to record in a house around Christmas. The amount of interruptions. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And Winston's interrupted, I think, 3 of them. He's done half of them. Barking at people calling to the door, deliveries, all that sort of stuff. People going past. It's been fun. So if there's a bit of barking in the background, we're probably just going to plow through this time. So yeah, sorry if there's some barking. You'll just have to deal with it. Okay, let's talk about this. So I was actually mentioned in one of the threads, and it was actually a nice comment, which was nice to read. But they were saying, like, obviously people are talking about all the different streamers and people covering it, and one person at least that I saw mentioned, they're like, oh hey, I watched Nubkeks stream where he's playing his placement games for this season, and that was a great example of, you know, someone being positive while also being, you know, giving interesting commentary about the game. So I forget exactly who left that comment, but, you know, thank you very much. It was a really nice thing to read. That being said, of course, I've not always been very positive in the past. And even nowadays, I'm not always that positive. So I want to talk a bit at the start here about kind of my personal approach to streaming. And then we'll get into kind of just more general streamers, like how ought streamers behave, or what I even think about the idea of them ought having to behave in any particular way at all, kind of at a fundamental level. Talk about all that stuff as well. But yeah, for myself, I used to stream like Hero League a lot more. I used to rage a lot more in those streams and kind of push for those higher ranks. But yeah, I used to rage all the time and quite hard on stream. And that would sometimes translate, it wouldn't very often translate into toxicity in game. Occasionally it would, but it would more so be while I was streaming, I'd be extremely negative with very, very harsh comments on the players I was playing with. Now, I don't do that anymore, certainly not anywhere near half as much. Why is that, though? Well, the reason, I just made that choice for myself personally, right? I just didn't particularly like the kind of streams I was making. I basically want my stream to be kind of a fun, an interesting place to hang out. Kind of a lot more chill is the way I wanted it to be. So I made the conscious decision to change how I was approaching streaming and streams so that I wouldn't do that anymore. And of course, when I did used to rage a lot, it's not like everyone hated it, far from it. In fact, there was a lot of people that really enjoyed it, right? They'd kind of come to the stream for the rage, and they liked it, and they encouraged it. And like there's an audience out there for it, you know, there really is. But I didn't want to cater to that particular audience. I mean, that's what you just have to do as someone who, you know, produces content, right? There's a million different audiences. You can't please them all. You have to choose which ones you want. In this case, I decided to change what I was doing quite a bit because I wanted to change it for myself. I didn't like raging all that much. I wanted to make it be the kind of stream that I would watch, which is kind of a more positive one. That being said, I don't value positivity or being positive or nice at my top value, like at all. It is something I try to do intentionally, but it's not like it's not my ultimate goal at all when I stream. Probably my ultimate like goals, the things I try to do more than anything are to be, I suppose, interesting and insightful about the games I'm playing. Also, you know, to be funny, to be entertaining, and then also, you know, to be positive and to create a positive atmosphere. But probably somewhat in that order, I suppose, in terms of the values I have going into it. And what that means is that, of course, very frequently, in order to be insightful and interesting and give actually good commentary in a game of Heroes, that involves not being positive, right? It involves saying like, hey, whatever, Arthas he just fucked up massively there. Like, that was awful play. What was he even thinking? Like, that was horrendous. It involves saying something. It involves being very, very critical of what people are doing. And I mean critical, I suppose, not in a more academic sense of the word critical, right? Which is just, giving sort of analytical, accurate, analytical analysis. That's an awful way of saying it, but I suppose, for the purposes here, it sums it up okay, right? I said I'd ramble. But yeah, it involves kind of actually breaking it down accurately. What was good, what was bad, right? It doesn't mean just talking about the good, it means talking about the bad as well. So that's what I try to do. And incidentally, one of the things that I very much notice, right? I very much notice, and this ties in very importantly to the initial Reddit thread of, people getting really not liking how higher ranked players, like pros in particular, and streamers, can be so negative about lower ranks. Very much ties into that. One thing that I've super noticed is that people are okay with small levels of criticism, but they really, really, really dislike harsher criticism, even if it's perfectly valid, even if it makes sense, right? If someone makes a huge mistake, there is a noticeable group of people watching that don't like it when you call that out, right? They value that positivity more than being insightful, right? So it's a different set of values. I think it's important to note. One thing that people dislike as well, very much so, is how you phrase things. So this is something that I have to focus on a lot, right? And I find that very important while streaming. And it's a challenge when streaming, right? Because let's say if Arthas does something awful and it's clear to me that he does something awful, you might be like, what the fuck were you thinking, Arthas? Like, you really fucked up. It's like, is this guy high or something? What the fuck was that? That might be, and for me watching the game, obviously that would make a lot of sense, right? But you have to bear in mind that for other people watching, it might not be anywhere near as clear. And then, you've some people that, they won't like you saying that sort of thing. Number one, because they might not appreciate that Arthas made that level of mistake. So then you being harsh, the way that you phrased it seems really unfair and nasty. Or they might just not like that sort of language used at all, right? So that's something I try to do. And it's, like I said, it's a challenge while you're streaming, because what I try to focus on is, even when someone does make a massive mistake, because you're streaming, it's live, it's very fast, and you're concentrating on a whole bunch of different things at once. I do have to focus now, right, on breaking things down. And you can't just say things off the cuff as much. You have to try to justify it a lot more, and basically take extra effort to basically go out of my way to be fair, right? Because I have to understand that people watching it, there's a whole lot of different people, and certainly in terms of play, there's a whole lot of different levels of play watching it. And that while a mistake might be very clear, let's say hypothetically someone goes out of position, it might be very clear, let's say hypothetically, to anyone that's platinum and above, right? It might not be clear to people who are below that. Again, this is a very loose example, right? But it might not be clear to people below that, so you kind of have to try to make things as clear as possible and be as fair as possible and break it out. That's something that I do, right? Because people don't like it otherwise. So that's something to be aware of. Or again, people are... Another thing I notice is people, again, they... it doesn't matter. I won't cover it there. I'll talk about this in another video, right? I'll cover this in another video. There's too much to talk about here in terms of kind of me and the sort of stuff that I try to do. But anyway, that gives you a bit of an insight, right? Into, you really do have to, I think, work hard to give fair commentary. And again, you have to bear in mind that it is a live situation. To touch on this, one final point on this, again, on this particular area, which is the idea of, let's say diamond and below being a cesspool in particular, you have to bear in mind, and I think a lot of people don't understand this and they don't appreciate it, especially when you don't play it at a high level, right? Like when you don't play at a pro level, I think you don't have all that much understanding, right, into the actual skill levels and the stuff that's actually going on. You know, that's just the way it is. Again, a lot of people won't want to hear that, but that's the way it is. And let me give you some examples. Let me break it down and explain it so that you can kind of understand what I actually mean by this, right? So, bear in mind, people can be very, like, they really don't like pro players, for example, giving out people who are diamond or below. You really have to understand. Sure, they might be being a dick about it, they might be being really rude about it, but you have to also understand where it's coming from, right? Which is, there's a huge skill gap between, let's say, a pro player and then someone in diamond. The skill gap is absolutely massive. And to give you an example for myself, right, even for me, when I was Grandmaster, okay, and playing with other pro players, there was still a massive skill gap between like lower tier Grandmasters and then the higher tier Grandmasters and pros. A massive skill gap, absolutely huge. Because, for example, although I was Grandmaster, I felt very kind of, you know, out of my depth in some of the games because you're going up against pro players, right, who have played against other pro players, you know, for hours every day, right? So they're very used to playing with other very strong players that know what they're doing and that are, you know, playing to a very, very, very high level with a very good understanding of the game. Whereas for me, having got to Grandmaster, obviously I'd ground from Diamond through Master and then into Grandmaster. An awful lot of the games that I had played had been against, you know, weaker players from lower leagues, right? It hadn't been against all these pro players, so when I was in those particular games, I definitely would have felt like a weak link. So even within, right, Grandmaster, there's a whole lot of different skill levels. Some of the issue, of course, comes down to placement games in general, where it squashes MMR and is a kind of a soft reset to the season, where it does kind of put broader levels of skills together than it otherwise would at different stages at different times. That is very important to bear in mind. You know, when to give you another perspective on it, you know, when like these, like you see a pro player raging at diamond players, again, although they might not say it in a nice way, where is this coming from? It's really very similar to, you know, you being in gold and then suddenly you're playing with people in bronze, right? Grandmaster, Master, Diamond, gold, silver, bronze, right? It's probably even, I would actually say, right, in my experience from what I've seen, there's a much broader skill gap between a diamond and a grandmaster than there is between a bronze and a gold. That's what I would say, from what I've seen from coaching and, yeah, commentating on this game for ages. So bear that in mind even more. But yeah, like I remember, you know, kind of being pissed off, and on one of my streams I was kind of going like, oh my god, we're with diamonds again, and someone was like, well, why are you so annoyed to be with diamonds again? Like, diamonds are good. And it's like, well, sure, I suppose objectively they're good, right? But bear in mind, subjectively, from the person who's playing, it's like, at the time, like I would mostly be playing with master players, right? So of course, playing with diamond players all the time, like getting a few games in a row with a lot of diamond players is, you know, that is something that's kind of frustrating, right? Because you want to be playing with people that are of similar skill. Sometimes you want to play with people that are worse than you, sometimes with people that are better than you, but in general you want to be playing with people of similar skill. So when you're playing oftentimes with weaker players, that is something that's frustrating, and it doesn't matter what rank they are. So again, for example, when I was GM, right, even playing with some of these pro players, they might be going, oh my god, like we're playing with, you know, this low level GM again, you know? And it's not because necessarily they're dicks. There's, you know, maybe they are being dicks about it, right, sometimes, but there's also a very important kernel of truth in that, which is that although, sure, whatever, GM 150 versus GM 15, you might go, oh, I mean, they're both GMs, right? There can even so be a large skill difference between that. And it might be frustrating for that higher player to be put with someone weaker. Equally, it might be frustrating for the weaker player to be put with people that are stronger. They're like, oh my god, I keep getting put into these tough games, right? I'm getting wrecked and I feel like a weak link and that sucks, right? There's a whole bunch of different perspectives on it, but you really do have to understand that. I do feel as well that oftentimes it's people, they feel that their own rank is being insulted. So it might be like, I think that's important as well. That sort of a personal thing can come into it, in that, let's say that you're someone in silver and you've been pushing really hard to get to gold and you feel very proud of getting to gold, and then you tune into a stream and the person's like, oh my god, like this diamond person sucks and they should be in gold. It's like, hey, you're just insulting the thing that I've worked really hard to get to. That can definitely be a part of it as well. And again, it comes down to, I think, like the language and the perspectives are actually very important. And it's something that I don't think people consider very, very often at all. And indeed, it can be very difficult to actually consider it, right? It can be very difficult to actually understand what it's like to be in these different situations. You know, empathy is not something that's easy to do. It's not something easy to do at all. So I just point that out in general. Speaking of this as well, one of the, again, before I come to the good, I suppose the good points, right? I've been very harsh on this so far, right? Before I come to the good points about this discussion, right, and stuff that is very worth discussing, I have to touch on one of the very poor parts about the discussion, which is this idea, kind of when toxicity is tried to be combated with toxicity, and this immense level of hypocrisy comes into it as well. A lot of kind of streamer envy or pro envy is sort of what I'd sum this up as, which is for a lot of people, when someone is better than you at something, you don't mind. You're like, yeah, fine, whatever. For example, in this case, Heroes of the Storm. You find someone who's better than you are at the game. For some people, they're like, yeah, I don't care. Like, they're better at me. That's fine. Don't care. It's totally okay. However, for other people, it does matter a lot, right? It does matter a lot. And you don't particularly like someone being better than you. You want to be, really good at something, right? Very human thing to do. Totally understandable, right? However, it can go good and it can go bad, right? When someone's better than you and it kind of bothers you, you can deal with it, I think, two very broad ways. And this is simplifying, but even still, I think it gives an insight, which is you could try to raise yourself up. You can go, okay, well, this player's better than me. Well, I'm going to learn. I'm going to improve. I'm going to raise myself up to that level, and then it won't bother me anymore because I'll be as good as them, right? They're not better than me anymore, right? That's a fairly positive way of dealing with it. Or, and again, this is the issue that I've seen crop up here a lot, you try to bring them down, right? Go, they're better than me. How do I deal with this? This is often done subconsciously, of course, right? This isn't a conscious thing. It's subconscious mostly. They try to insult, drag them down, disparage them, and just be mean, basically, and just belittle them, make them less. And that way, then they're not better than you anymore because you've redefined what it means, right? So to give you an example, one example I saw, one specific comment actually, which I think illustrates this really well, was someone going, huh, pro players? Oh, you mean people that don't have a job or a college degree? And you see this sort of stuff all over the place, right? Again, it's very funny. It's a double standard where people that work hard, hey, hard work, working hard, investing in something and bettering yourself, that's usually a pretty admirable thing, right? That's something we encourage. But then you see it on, you see these gamers or gaming forums, or I get comments where people going like, oh, they're just like losers, bloody losers, just spending all their time in a game, working hard in a game, get a life. What's going on there? Again, I think a big thing is this idea of, someone's better than me. How do I deal with it? Bring them down. Make their achievement meaningless. Make it less. Again, it's subconscious, but I really do think that's a huge part of it. And it's very sad to see that stuff. I mean, there's always the irony as well, a pro player, someone without a job or a life, without a job or a college degree, it's kind of like, oh, you don't actually know what pro means. That's slightly awkward. But you see a lot of that, it's not often very well thought through. It's just bring them down. Be really nasty about it. And unfortunately, that has cropped into this an awful lot, into this debate. For example, again, more comments I saw on videos discussing the resets, a lot of people going, ha, these pro players, they're no better than us, and it's finally shown, it's finally shown that they're no better, and you've been put in your place, and now you're in, you got some GM, like GM 18 in Korea or something, put in platinum. It's like, well, they're no better than platinum, and now it finally shows it. You have to put in a reality check here. I'm sorry, guys. But, GM 18 in Korea is better than Platinum, and there was a bug, right, in the placement system. That's just the way it is. And you just have to be okay with, unfortunately, there are very large differences in skill levels in this game. And, yeah, that's just the way it is, and that was a bug. So it sucks. But I think that's where a lot of this discussion came from. And some of this criticism of pros and streamers definitely came from this, which is... yeah, I think the placement games definitely fed into it and gave some fuel for some of this hate and this envy and bringing people down. I think it's sad to see because, like I said, there's good stuff to discuss here, and that toxicity really, really, really doesn't add anything good, and it's not good to have it in the game or in the discussion, unfortunately. But it's all over the place. It really is. You can't, like, I certainly, as someone who makes this sort of stuff, I can't go a day oftentimes without seeing people, be that kind of just that level of disparaging, and it's a pity. It really is. But anyway, should streamers behave a certain way at all? Like, is this even something that makes sense? I know Grubby had a pretty famous quote on this at one stage, right? I think talking about Moonfairs, where I forget what he said, but it was like some really over-the-top description. But basically what he was saying was, you know, streamers, you know, you do have a duty. And this is, again, I think a lot of people also hold to a similar-ish position. I'm sure that there's lots of nuances, right? I can't sum them all up, but basically what's going on is going like, well, streamers, you're an example to the community, you're a visible part of the community, so streamers ought to be positive, ought to be, you know, giving a good message, putting on a good face, always, always being positive, and, you know, that sort of idea of leadership or whatever, right? So I actually don't agree with this fully at all. For me, at the core, a streamer is an entertainer, right? That's what it is. You're producing something that's entertaining to watch. And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So again, like I said, for example, when I used to be like raging a lot, there's a lot of people that really enjoyed it. And I think that's totally fine. People like watching people rage at games, right? That's what they like doing. Are you giving a good example or being a leader or, you know, representing the community when you're raging at games? No, but it's funny. It's entertaining for a lot of people to watch, and that's totally okay. That's the type of content that people are interested in. It's understandable, I think, why they are as well. You can hopefully see why that is interesting to watch. People like it. Streamers can provide that, and I think that's totally fine, right? I actually don't see an issue with that. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. I see streamers ultimately at the core as being, you know, entertainers. That being said, on top of that, you can also do other things as a streamer as well. For example, you can be like an example of, you know, positivity and try to promote positivity in the game. That's also something that streamers can do. You can, you know, try to be, you know, insightful or give like good commentary, be good educationally, a whole bunch of different stuff. There's lots of different possibilities for what streamers can do. The key point I have here is that, you know, being positive and being this great example of team spirit and happy isn't the only thing that streamers ought to do. I definitely think that it's not the only thing they do. There's lots of other things they do, and I think that's actually very important. So yeah, I don't see the streamers as having to be super positive, and pro players either having to be super positive all the time. Another example comment I saw was like people going, I watched a stream of this, you know, pro player, I forget who it was, and like they were being really harsh about the players they're in a game with. You know, if you saw a football player doing the same thing, there'd be a media frenzy, there'd be this huge, you know, fight over it, this huge problem over it, you know, be a huge controversy, you know, so why can't streamers be more like that? And I think, you know, you lose out on something though if it's like that, because, you know, it's like, you know, with football and footballers, sure, but like, is the media always a good thing? Like all this attention, all this political correctness? I don't think so. I don't think that's always good. And you definitely lose out on a lot of honesty and genuineness, because when you look at these people, they're not being honest or genuine, right? They're putting on a face to appeal to their fans so they can make more money. So I think that's really a pity, because something that's good about streamers is that you can get into that more honest, you can get that more honest look, right? That's one thing that I value about streaming that you can do specifically with streaming. It's because you're streaming, you can be streaming for hours a day, right? So it can give you like this much more genuine, and you're not doing it, you know, just someone with a decent computer and decent internet connection can go and stream. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of, you know, meet and interact with a real person. Of course, streamers oftentimes do put on a very large facade, right? They put on a character very often. So maybe not always meeting someone that genuine, but at least you get that opportunity. And I think if it's the super regulated, politically correct thing, you lose out on that. And I think that is a very genuine loss. So that's definitely something that I would highlight here as well. That's a huge loss, I think, if you regulate it so much and streamers can only behave a certain way and they're constantly being judged, and basically your opinion depends on this. Another thing that this also draws on as well, which I think is very important, can also be like language, right? Can be language. What sort of language you use. So for example, like I'm Irish, right? And I swear a lot more than, let's say, some people from other places would. I remember Preach Gaming, who's a WoW YouTuber, talking about this, and it's really interesting that he's getting super penalized by YouTube and getting videos demonetized because, you know, he'd kind of swear and use these, you know, quote unquote, swear words all the time. But he's from like England, from a particular, I don't remember which part, but from where he was, from where he grew up, they're just normal words. They're just words that they use in normal conversation. But the people over in YouTube, from wherever they are, presumably somewhere in the States and from whatever cultural group, for them, those words are very bad words. So he's getting super penalized because it's basically saying, you can't use those words. You can't talk like that. That's a bad way to talk. So I think that's also something of a pity and something to be aware of as well. You know, that often it's just something to be aware of. You know, when someone, you might be going into it and be like, oh, he's like, you know, fucking hell, like you're such a fucking, like, what a fucking cunt. I think cunt would be one of the words that he'd use, right? And he'd be like, for me, that's just a super normal word. But for other people in other parts of the word, that's an extremely harsh word. So your language as well does get very much regulated, and that's always a big threat too, that you have to speak in a particular way. You can only use particular words, and even if it's totally normal for you to use those words and you don't mean anything bad by it, if someone else in a different part of the world would mean something bad by it, then you can't talk that way. And yeah, that's also something to be aware of here too as well. So I think there's a lot of, I mean, I could talk for a lot more on this, where I'm going off in all sorts of different directions here. But yeah, kind of in short, to summarize, I don't think that streamers ought to be, you know, positive all the time. I really don't think they have to be that. I think you can have like rage streamers and you can talk harshly, and you also have to understand that, you know, sometimes you have to go out of your depth a little bit to understand sometimes where those frustrations are coming from. That being said, you know, people rage a lot, right? And can often rage a lot, and more than they probably would want to. So that is something to be aware of, right? And it's like, for me, like I said at the start, like I work harder now on being positive and on raging less. That's something I intentionally do. And that's something that other people and other streamers might want to do as well. But it's not, I don't want any like absolute goals or regulations like streamers have to talk and always be positive and always say nice things. I think there's a lot of downsides to that. I think you'll lose out on a lot of stuff. But I think that most people, most streamers and content creators would want to be fairly positive most of the time. Maybe fall short of that goal at sometimes, but it's not the ultimate goal. It's not the only goal. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here. Yeah, anyway, we can talk about it more in the comments. I might do a follow-up video when I've got like maybe 2 or 3 points kind of focused in a little bit more on the stuff that you guys really want to talk about. So I'll see you guys all then. Thanks for watching this one anyway. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.